Welcome to Baseball and Coffee, episode 19 with Tino and Aaron. Good morning, Aaron.
Good morning.
It's an early one this morning because of some scheduling stuff, but we'll do our best to, well, I'll do my best to stay, keep my head out of the clouds and stay a little bit caffeinated and ready to roll. It's been too long.
I'm on my normal level of tired, so I'll be less coherent or more coherent than normal.
How you doing, man?
Doing well. Having some turmeric tea this morning. I wish it was coffee, but bedtime's too soon.
But you got any coffee stories?
Yeah, I just wanted to share. I cupped that coffee. It was a Colombia. Cupping is I think I talked a little bit about it before. It's not a recreational enjoyment way to brewing coffee. It's more just to really evaluate the coffee, what it has to offer, and it's kind of like core elements, really breaking it down to the body and the flavor and looking at the acidity and the finish and just sort of those basic things. But I hadn't done it in a long time in Colombia. One of my favorite things about tasting Colombia is you kind of get this kind of red fruit tone with cupping Colombia. And that's not at all the way that Colombia presents when it's in a finished roast. And so it's just one of those things that really highlights the difference in that particular evaluation. So I just enjoyed doing it and just again, kind of tasting the bare elements of the coffee, kind of stripping a lot of things away in terms of roast, because roast brings so much nuance and complexity to the coffee. And so kind of just doing it in a very straightforward way and looking again the coffee in its sort of base form. I really enjoyed it, and Colombia's cupped a lot of Colombia, and it's a very fond thing for me.
That's my favorite.
That's awesome. I've been enjoying my standard brew method, but I've been thinking about moving on to a different brew method at home, at least just to kind of change it up. I think that it's the experience has stagnated a bit. The coffee itself and the quality of the coffee remains the same, but I've always, I think, typically moved from V60 to Chemex to, at this point in time, it's more about convenience and just brewing a pot of coffee. But I do think it would be fun to get back to doing a little more craft stuff at home. But it's interesting that the choice, when I think about it, the choice has less to do with experience as much as it does convenience, and how to balance the convenience of coffee versus the experience itself. So I was going to ask you, in that kind of situation, do you have an absolute favorite brew method or any sort of suggestions for me? I've certainly brewed coffee at home with just about every method, and have a baratza, so I'm able to adjust the grind on the fly and whatnot.
I think my choice tends to be more driven by emotion and feeling and kind of what I'm in the mood for, more so than just really enjoying executing something. And then that's one thought. And then my other thought is, in terms of when I think about what I enjoy doing, is when I like doing a pour over and the design, I've noticed recently, I'm just kind of getting this Rosetta, just kind of overlapping circle shape. And I don't know, I have a new kettle that I bought right before we moved, and I didn't use it much when we first moved. And so I don't know if it's just like the spout is cut differently, and because I just honestly never noticed that before. For things that I make, but I've noticed recently it's really increased my enjoyment of pouring it, because I just get this almost like artistic kind of floral pattern as I go in my circles. I kind of work middle out and then back in, but I do enjoy that. I also try to do something, this sounds really simple as I do with the coffee, but I try to go over to the corner of the kitchen where we have a window that outlooks the backyard. We have like a bird feeder out there, and my coffee counter is kind of on the opposite end of the kitchen. But I'll take the time to, once I get my everything measured and stuff, I'll go down there and stand by the window, so that when I'm waiting between pours, I can be looking outside and, just instead of being in the dark corner which in the first thing in the morning, you don't necessarily dark order is the worst thing, but that's another thing that I've done intentionally to try to increase my enjoyment of it.
That's cool. It just hit me why I struggle with what to choose. And I don't think it's convenience or consumption experience or convenience. I realize now that if I take on something other than just brewing a pot of coffee, I'll obsess over the imperfections of the cup and potentially enjoy it a lot less, even though it's a much higher quality cup of coffee. So I think I made V60 for a long time because V60 was one of the methods. For those who don't know, Hario makes a really nice ceramic cone pour over that they call V60, and you use a paper filter. You know, you get the ceramic cone pretty hot with pouring hot water over it. You would hear the filter without any bubbles between the filter, air bubbles between the filter and the cone. You measure out your coffee, and then you pour, and it's usually about 3 minutes is what it takes to pour a cup of coffee in that manner. But the more time I spend creating that cup of coffee, or Chemex specifically, the more critical I am of the cup itself.
Okay.
And knowing myself, just like anything else, if I start to go down that road and give myself more opportunity to influence the cup of coffee, I may not enjoy it in the same way that I do now. It becomes a labor of love and a task, but a task nevertheless, right? Where I'm thinking about how to do it better all the time. And I think now that I evaluate, I think that may be the reason why I've moved to something that is more automated and takes the creativity away. Because it becomes something, there's some anxiety or stress associated with, I think, making it in a more craft form. But with that said, I think I've said this on an earlier podcast that a really well done, beautiful Chemex is my absolute favorite brew method. And it may be time to take that back on. So just interesting thoughts. I think it's fun to share those. It's something that at least in my world, because I'm not in the coffee world anymore, I really appreciate being able to share the detail and the goofiness of it, because it's something that you know, most of the people in my life, their eyes would glaze over if we had that conversation. All right, on to baseball.
Yeah.
So today we're going to talk about our Fantrax league and some of the details of our league. I think it's beneficial to talk about because we will touch on some free agent pickups that apply to everyone, and probably evaluate some of the players, talk a little bit of strategy. But it applies not only to our league and our players, but obviously to any league. We'll talk a little bit about some things going on in Major League Baseball, why the umpiring has been so bad this year, some injuries, some young pitchers. We'll do a couple of player deep dives, and then a couple of stories or things that have happened in the last week or two that we've enjoyed, maybe a series that we're looking forward to this upcoming week, and then open forum if we have time. So your team this week or last week, what are your initial thoughts?
Didn't have a great week results wise. My team, like a lot of teams, is just not hitting at all. I also had a really probably the number one challenge I had with my roster was just trying to get a sixth starter. Luis Patino was my sixth starter, and he got hurt in the first inning of his first game this year. And the first week we had 10 days, 9 days. So I had no problem meeting our starting requirement. But the way the second week lined up, I had no 2 starts. And so I had to get really creative with finding a sixth starter just so that my pitching stats would count, because the way it works only is if you don't meet the minimums, you get zeros across the board. So that was something for me to address. I think long-term wise, to add pitching depth, I did trade for Mike Clevenger, but that's more of a late May, early June. By summertime, adding quality depth, but it's not a short-term fix. So I had to get creative. So that it left me in a tough spot. And I went after Oakland. I targeted Oakland and pitched some Oriole pitchers against Oakland. That did not go well. Ended up costing me ERA. I still won strikeouts. Bullpen, I had one holds, but didn't get saved. So, pitching is where I kind of lean in, and I was like 3 and 4, I think, in pitching, and then hitting wise, I just didn't compete.
Who were the Orioles pitchers you picked up, and what was your thought process?
Yeah, so I picked up Tyler Wells, who we talked about, I think, briefly as a stuff play, and he was a reliever last year, showed plus command and good stuff as a reliever, and they're transitioning him to being a starter. I picked him up purely as a talent, down the road, see what he does. And the first game I had him on my roster, I didn't play him. It was against the Yankees. He pitched 4 scoreless. And then I knew also that he was lining up to face Oakland the next week. So my thought was, if he pitches well against the Yankees, shows more command, and he did his first start against Tampa, I'm confident to start him there. And so that was the plan. That's what I did. I felt good based on what he did against the Yankees. And he didn't pitch poorly, but he gave up a home run. And so he had a good amount of swinging strikes, but walked too many guys and took him out early. And then I doubled down on the mistake by taking Keegan Aiken as well, who's pitched behind him. I knew by usage, I anticipated that he was going to pitch behind Tyler, and he did. And he also gave up a 2-run homer. So Sean Murphy and I think Pache was the other. So, the A's are a bottom 10 offense, and I tried to make some hay against them, and it didn't work out.
I think it's one of those situations where the process was sound.
Yeah.
And the stuff is there, and the park was there, and the offense was there, but it just sometimes that's the way it works, and it's hard. It makes me think about the decision to invest in starting pitching and be able to say, like, okay, I'm locking this in. I don't want to have to think about this or worry about it at the expense of potentially relief pitching or your offense. Versus, I think for you that's a sound way to go about it, because you tend to be ahead of the curve as far as pitching goes. This one just didn't happen to work out, but I do think it's a sound way to go. And I also think that streaming against Oakland, specifically in Oakland, is going to be a smart way to go this entire year if you can.
Yeah. So not to make it all about that, but I mean, as I look at my week back and what I challenged me and what I spent time on, that was really, it was just trying to make sure. And I think ultimately, again, like, I was competitive across the board in pitching. I just came up a few short. I was really close. I had someone in the bullpen, I think Saturday night, I gave up like a run. I think it was Luis Garcia. Yeah, it was Luis Garcia for San Diego, because I rage dropped him right after the game. He came in, walked 2 batters, struck someone out, and then they brought in Rogers to face Trey Turner, and he had a 2-run double off the wall, and both the runners were assigned to Garcia. And then that pushed me behind an ERA, where I had been winning that. And then I couldn't make it up Sunday. My opponent's pitchers just to pitch just well enough to hold me off. But
I had an interesting experience pitching wise this week. I won ERA, WHIP, and wins, and I tied in losses, and I lost Ks, saves, and holds. And what's interesting about it to me is, I always just I've talked about this before. I think about my starting pitching as being 6 starters, and I don't want to go too far past 6 because it makes me, I just don't think the depth is there in a 16-team league to have more than 6 quality starters. And I also worry about diluting the ratios of my really good starters, obviously. But I lost pitching categories this week in part because I just went against someone who has 8 starters. So Chico's bail bonds, I feel like, has inferior starters, but he just kind of bulked me to death. I also didn't get much from my bullpen. But so I only ended up with 2 holds and 2 saves over the course of the entire week. But I had a 2.06 ERA and a 1.076 whip. So again, it was quality over quantity for me. I did dive a little deeper into a couple of my pitchers, and I found some really interesting stuff. I wanted to know why Logan Gilbert has been so dominant. So including his start yesterday, he's 3-0, 22.1 innings, 15 hits, 4 walks, 22 Ks, a 0.40 ERA, and a 0.851 whip. And what I found was that, so he was a pretty strong fly ball pitcher last year. His average launch angle given up was 19.2 degrees. And this year it's all the way down to 11.4 degrees. So he's surrendering fewer fly balls. His ground ball rate has gone up 6%, but his fly ball rate has gone down 8%. So there's a little change in the batted ball type. The big change for him, though, his velo is on his fastball the same. His fastball usage is pretty similar at 59%. He's got a little more drop, 1.2 inches of drop, a little bit more horizontal movement on the fastball, but the big shifts are with his other pitches. His slider, he's throwing at 86 now, and about 24% of the time, but it's 2.6 miles an hour harder than his slider was last year. So he's brought the velocity of the slider way up, a little bit closer to the fastball. It's got a little less drop and about the same horizontal movement, but it's proven to be a much higher quality pitch. His fastball is a top 5 fastball in baseball as far as starters effectiveness.
Or 4-seam, right? 4-seam.
4-seam, just great extent. Really, it's the extension. That's the big deal for him.
I just read an article about that, about what you're talking about, the slider, about when you throw it harder and you get, it sounds like he gets the same amount of break, but the pitcher in question, and forgive me, I shouldn't bring this up without knowing exactly. I'll find it. I read it recently, but it was basically talked about how when you increase the velocity, even though the break is smaller, it's called like the effective break. It makes it more effective. Right. I'll have to find it and send it to you. It was really interesting. I think in light of what you're sharing, I think you might find it interesting.
I wonder too, like I know that obviously the harder the pitch is, the more difficult it is to hit typically, but I also wonder if it's a little more difficult to pick up what the pitch is if the velocities are closer, right? Is he tunneling better, and is the pitch because it's coming at them harder? There's a split second or it takes a split second longer to identify that it's a slider. Whereas when he was throwing it, at 84 or 83.5, you had a split second longer to identify, oh, this is a slider, right? Just a thought, but I do think there's some validity to that. The other pitches, his curve is up almost 5 miles an hour and his change is up almost 6 miles an hour. And those are both pitches that he throws under 10%. But it looks like there was a conscious decision to bring all of his non-fastball pitches closer in velocity to the fastball. And it's proven to be really effective thus far. It's just a fun exercise. Like, it's kind of hard to take some of the other stats and give them any weight because he's only pitched 22 innings.
Right.
Obviously, something like stuff and pitch shape and velocity is something we can really look at immediately to decide whether this pitcher is a different pitcher than he was last year. And then I looked into all my starters a bit. Carlos Rodon and Max Scherzer have been really like noticeably similar. They're both 3-0. Rodon 23 innings, Scherzer 25. They've each surrendered 11 hits and 8 walks. Rodon 38 Ks, Scherzer 33. I know I'm not going to get that performance from both of them over the course of the year, but their starts have been encouraging. And then Robbie Ray and Zach Wheeler.
Robbie Wheeler, you just combined your.
Yeah, I know. Wheeler and Ray are both of pretty high concern for me. I'd say Wheeler even more so than Ray. Um, Wheeler's 0-3. He's given up 17 hits in 12 and 2/3 innings. But the concerning part is his fastball's down 2 miles an hour. His slider's down 0.8 miles an hour, and his sinker is down 2.1 miles an hour. And so obviously there's some velocity issue. He had some shoulder soreness coming out of during the lockout. But I have watched him pitch, and he doesn't seem to be the same pitcher yet. He's one of those that I'll continue to roll out there because I think that, whoever I would pick up off the wire to replace him, if I wanted to sit him for a little bit, is probably not going to be as good as even average Zach Wheeler. But I am concerned about his health. It wouldn't surprise me if they shut him down for a little while and try to bring him back.
Yeah.
And then Ray is it's interesting. So here's something interesting. So Robbie Ray is also down 2.6 miles an hour with his fastball and 2.2 with the slider. However, because I watched the Mariners games, I know that he pitched in the cold and he pitched in the rain in Chicago. And he said out loud that the conditions are what really impacted his velocity. And then his velocity was up a little bit in his last start at home. So even though his velocity is decreased more than Zach Wheeler versus last year, because I have more detailed knowledge on Ray, as a Mariners fan, I'm less worried about him. The results also haven't been quite as bad. But again, this is a fun exercise to figure out kind of what starters you can start to rely upon and feel like those are core pieces of your team. And then, with Wheeler, someone like Wheeler, do I need to add speculatively to potentially backfill him if he does get hurt? It might be prudent for me, if I had a roster spot, to actually pick someone up that I like as a starter, and maybe not even start that player, but know that he's there in the case that Wheeler goes down.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't dig into relievers too much. They just haven't pitched enough innings to really tell anything yet. I do like David Bednar. He looks to be the real deal. And
He's a stud, man.
And I've got, the most ghettoest garbage saves with Melanson and David Robertson, but in our league, I'll take it. The one.
Can I add something on Gilbert?
Yeah.
And this is going from the fantastic tangible analysis you did to completely intangible.
Mm-hmm.
To me, one of the more impressive things to me was that game you had in Chicago with all the wind and like all the fly balls that weren't being caught. Like, for someone who's still in his first, stages of his career, no, just not to be rattled by that. You know what I mean? I just think it shows a lot of poise, the command of your emotions, and like, I don't know. I just think it bodes well for his makeup. And again, that's completely intangible. But I don't. On the opposite side, you got someone like Garrett Cole complaining that the pregame ceremony with Billy Crystal took too long.
Right.
So I mean, those things are just not lost on me. So I don't know. I just props to him, because that had to be really difficult for everyone, including him, because he's the one on the mound. So
his makeup is really interesting. I alluded to this, I think, on the last pod, but he's just he kind of swims in pitching statistics and methods in the same way that we do, obviously more so because it's his job.
Sure.
But he obsesses over stats and he obsesses over pitch shape, and he's kind of a baseball nerd in a lot of ways. And I think that shows in some of the adjustments he's made this year. But to your point, he doesn't show frustration. He does show some emotion if he gets out of a jam, but he doesn't show frustration. He's pretty locked in and pretty stoic on the mound. And yeah, I think that would be, if I was pitching, and there were 3 pop-ups that were dropped because of the wind, I'd be super frustrated. And he just kind of kept grinding, and you could tell it got to him a little bit, but in that he celebrated when he got out of it. But yeah. And I don't know if that's something that it would help to look for in a pitcher or in a player, that stability, because the case could be made that sometimes that extreme level of intensity on the outward intensity on the positive can be a good thing too. But yeah, I agree. I like his makeup, and I think that it's he can owe a little bit of his success to the fact that he's able to stabilize and get through the storm sometimes.
Yeah, I think there's an element of like just admiring that and like rooting for the player and outside of fantasy. And I think from a fantasy perspective as well, I think, again, I shouldn't bring these things up. I need to keep like a notebook where I hear or read these things, but I just consume so much baseball. But recently I'd heard, and it was a pitcher, and it was like one of the games, and they're kind of talking about the player's perspective, but he was saying, only about for a starting pitcher, you may have your best stuff like 1 time out of 4. And the other 3 times you have to grind through it. You may not have a feel for one of your pitches, or maybe your command is off, or but it's only like once in a while that you're going to be locked in.
Right.
And I just think that for players who can do that, who are willing to do that, or an error is made behind them, or something like that, and they don't fall apart, I think it does matter for their on-field performance.
Right.
Look at someone like Strasburg and like how he matured. He was called the orchid by a lot of people, fans of the team, because he would wilt under any situation. Like if a defensive play wasn't made or a bad call by the umpire, like he would just come off the rails. And as he developed and matured and learned to like let that stuff roll off of him, he really developed into a premium pitcher before his arm fell off. So
Right.
anyway,
So your offense, how'd your offense perform?
it didn't. And I've been, I stayed really, I have not turned really on my offense. I made one change going into this week, and that was to drop Darren Ruff. But outside of that, I've kept everyone. I lost my backup catcher to a concussion. Thank you, Luke Voigt, for that. And but I mean, I've just stayed the course. Going into this week, I mean, I'm not looking back just because I don't have much to say. I don't really know what to do about what happened. But going forward, going into this week, I looked at hard hit rate, chase rate, XBA, and X slug, just to try to get a sense of who's hitting the ball hard, who is seeing the ball well, what beyond the poor surface level production, who potentially is performing better than those surface stats would suggest, just to see if there were any adjustments I could make. I did choose to move off Darren Ruff, which I didn't necessarily want to do, but I had to open up a spot for Torkelson because my plan was to slow roll him this year and let him adjust. But he's my best first baseman right now. So I can no longer justifiably keep him on the bench. And so I had to free up a spot. And Ruff was redundant at first and he was my 5th outfielder and my 3rd first baseman. I really like his plate approach and his power, but he has batted number 3 every single day for the Giants, and he's just done nothing with it. All he has is a bunch of warning track shots and a bunch of walks. So I just had to let go of him for the time being because I feel like Torkelson has to play right now.
Mm-hmm.
My other challenge with my lineup is getting Mateo in the lineup because he is not one of my better hitters, but he leads the league in steals.
Yeah.
And so if I had found a way to selectively play him 75% of the games last week, I'd have won steals. Right. As it was, I lost it by 1, but I only played him twice. Because right now he's my backup shortstop. If Seager is off or rests, he's my backup second baseman because Segura is hitting the crap out of the ball and leading off now. Mm-hmm. And he's my 4th outfielder. Or was my 4th outfielder. So unless one of those guys said like he wasn't playing. But I'm just realizing, he's a categorical asset and he's not a great hitter by the way I measure hitting, but he's not a 0 either. Right. So he has 3 or 4 doubles. He hits a lot of line drives, and he's just exceptionally fast. And he bats 9th. And I know we don't covet the 9th spot, but that's right in front of Cedric Mullins. So, And we all agree Cedric Mullins is pretty good. So it could be worse. And he could be down there in like 6-7 no man's land with no one behind him. So so anyway, um, encouraged by what he's doing. I just feel like I have to figure out a way to manage my roster to get him in the lineup more often, so I can benefit more from his categorical upside. So those are the adjustments I've made: getting Torgelson in, thinking really critically about how I want to get Mateo involved, and then yeah, just trying to look at the skills with my hitters to see are there any tweaks I can make, which honestly wasn't too revealing, to be frank.
I think there's some, you're talking about Mateo, there's some benefit to having somebody who's a steals guy batting ninth, in that because he's not, or eighth, kind of bottom of the order, because they're seen as not as a throwaway, but if you get on as the number 1 or 2 hitter, a lot of times teams don't want to run with those guys because your bigger and better hitters are coming up, and you don't want to take that chance of not having somebody on base to be driven in. But in the 8-9 spot, they kind of, there are teams that will throw caution to the wind and let those players run, because it's it's considered it's free money essentially if Mateo gets on. And so there is something to be said for having him in that spot. I've never felt comfortable having a player like that whose OPS is going to be, sub 700. How do you adjust for that? And is that something that you're comfortable doing? I think there are two arguments there. Some people are not comfortable with it. Some people always have someone who's able to pick up steals but doesn't have the OPS.
Oh, I'm definitely uncomfortable. And I think that's reflected in my decisions of when I played him. I've treated him as his positional eligibility is, he has 4 positions, and I viewed him as he's someone I can plug in on guys when my starters have days off. I can plug him in anywhere. I can try to maximize at bats and maximize opportunity. And when he plays, like, he's a categorical asset. But I viewed him strictly in that sense, and because I'm not comfortable with it. So I'd be interested to hear like your perspective on how to be comfortable with it, or what the thought is about absorbing that. But truthfully, the way my team is performing, my batters are performing, like his OPS is not that different than anybody else's. So it's not like I'm setting a high performing hitter to this point. Certainly have guys who have done that, who have track record to do that. But currently, I mean, the guys with the over 800 OPS on my team are Torco and Benintendi, and the list ends there.
The approach that I would be comfortable with would be to probably have a player like that, but use him based on what happens over the first couple of days of the week. And obviously you can't predict when he's going to steal, and so you may miss out on steals. But if I had a team that was built in a more balanced manner, right, then I would be able to plug him in, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or Friday, Saturday, Sunday, based on what my opponent has done with regards to steals. I do think that the approach in roto versus head-to-head is, the differences are really reflected with regards to players like Mateo, because being able to rack up a bunch of steals with someone like Mateo really does give you an advantage in roto if you can keep your OPS and some of the other categories afloat. But again, it's something that I'm not super comfortable with. I would, like most people, I'd much prefer to have kind of balanced speed across the board. But with that kind of approach, for me, I have Buxton and Pham as 2 of the players that I'm expecting to get 15 to 20 steals from, and both of them only have 1 steal thus far. And I don't know that Acuna or Tatis are going to run when they come back. Acuna did have a steal in his first rehab start, but I'm a little bit apprehensive, or a little bit nervous about that. Thankfully, Julio has 6 and McCutchen has 3. But yeah, it's an approach that I've seen win championships for people, right? I think it was Matt who had both D. Gordon and Billy Hamilton one year, and used them sometimes in tandem to really dominate that category. And it was one of the ways in which one of the things he did to win. So real quickly, I tied in hits won runs, RBIs, and steals, and lost homers and OPS. I basically got carried by Byron Buxton. He's 7 for 13 with 5 runs, 3 homers, and 7 RBIs. I know this is for later on in the pod, but did you see his home run off of Andres Munoz?
Yes.
That was one of the most impressive home runs I've ever seen. The pitch was 100.5 miles an hour. And where is it here? I wrote the stats down. It was 112.3 off the bat and 100.5 mile an hour pitch. It was at his eyes. For those who haven't seen it, go back and watch. It was on March 9th, Mariners at Minnesota, but it was such an impressive home run. If this was a redraft, where would you pick Buxton as of right now?
What pick do I have?
Would you pick him in the top 10?
Yes.
Would you pick him in the top 5?
Yeah, I think I would. I mean, my feelings about him are known, so I value him exceptionally highly.
It's
Yeah,
fun.
and, and so you see everything that he did last year. He's still continuing to do it. So I think when you have more information, it just confirm my position that he was exceptionally valuable.
Right.
So I just don't think I don't think there's a lot of reasons not to. Other than that he just gets nicked up.
Right.
You hear all the from everyone from Carlos Correa to everyone else is talking about the kind of player and leader he is, and so I just don't doubt his talent one bit.
It's been fun. This year has been fun with him. The other players I want to touch on real quick. Wilson Contreras, when I was screwing around on Savant, it's cool to see some of the stuff that we talk about or research come to fruition, because his batted ball metrics were right there with Will Smith. And that was something that we had talked about during the preview. And thus far this season, he's been at the top in a lot of the different batted ball categories, and it's proving out in his performance. And so that for me has been really gratifying and fun to see. Obviously, Julio is Julio. We kind of all know what's happened with him. He's been called out on more pitches, more called strike threes outside of the zone than any other player in the league. And he's seeing a ton of breaking balls right now. But speaking of Gilbert's attitude, I think that seeing Julio stay enthusiastic and himself throughout the struggles and not expanding the zone has been really, really great to see. He's a pretty resilient dude. And he's also provided 6 steals, which has been great. And then obviously, my love for Buxton, Moncada, and Acuna and J-Rod. But the other player that I've come to absolutely love is Tommy Pham. And he started off the season struggling quite a bit. Yeah. He started to hit a little bit this week. This week he was 7 for 22, 4 runs, 2 homers, 2 RBIs, and a 1.057 OPS. And he's super intense.
Yeah.
And I dug a little bit into him because he's just kind of a goofy dude. And everything that I read said he's just one of the most intense individuals anyone has ever met. And he obsesses over anything that he tackles, almost to the point of it being to his detriment, right? You can't give anything up. But I like that about him. And I don't know, he's just one of those players that I've come to love. And I didn't anticipate that happening. He was like my last keeper that I submitted at the very last minute before the deadline. And I've just come to really enjoy him quite a bit. And I'm looking forward. We
need the Reds to get it back together, man.
We do.
India came back. I know that think as highly as I do, but still, he's a good leadoff hitter, and need Senzel to stay healthy. You need Stevenson back on the field. We need Barrero, pardon me, back on the field with that team, lengthen that lineup, and so that
Farmer is a below average major league. He's
that Pham and Votto and those guys can thrive. I really need it because right now that lineup without those guys, the lineup is just dreadful.
Right. And then I think May 6th is the date that Ronald Acuna should be back. He's on a rehab stint right now. We have him in TGFBI, and I obviously have him in Fantrax. So I'm looking forward to seeing him. Just as a fan, I miss seeing him. He makes the Braves watchable. I'm not a huge Braves fan.
Yeah,
Did you grow up watching WTBS at all?
I did. Yes.
It's funny because that's still what I think of
Yeah.
when I think of Atlanta. I don't think of the Glavine Smoltz, Maddox teams as much as I think of maybe like Steve Bedrosian and Brad Komisk and all these really random Glenn Hubbard and random Atlanta Braves. But Acuna is the one who makes it worth watching for me. And I miss him a lot. And then if we want to talk a little bit real quickly about our waiver moves, I made 2 this week. I cut Adam Frazier, who was second base and outfield eligible. I liked that he was at the top of the Mariners lineup, but he was, I don't know. I know he'll end up hitting probably 290 and have, I'm guessing like 8 home runs. And I like the flexibility that he provided, but he did not start very well, and there's no upside, right? He's just kind of there. And I already roster Colton Wong. And so I picked up Andres Jimenez, mostly because I think that he has shortstop eligibility and second base eligibility, and he'd be able to play on some days when Brandon Crawford was not, and then be able to fill in at second. And the other one was I saw the bright shiny. So here's a question for you. When somebody cuts a player who you have ranked preseason pretty decently,
Yeah.
do you spend a waiver claim on that player pretty immediately? Do you look at the performance thus far, even though it's a really small sample size? Do you get excited when you see those players pop up on the wire? So the player I picked up and then subsequently cut was Trent Grisham, right? I think we talked about him as kind of an outfield 3 in our league, and potentially, 2020 or 2015, kind of in that range, and IOBP. And I saw him get cut. And, my first thought was, well, I don't need an outfielder, but he seems like a good asset to gamble on, right? At the bottom of my roster. And he was crap. I watched his at-bats and he looked lost at the plate. He really looked lost. And so that was one of those times where I used the opportunity to actually watch the player to make a decision. I know what his stats say. I know what his batted ball metrics say, but just watching him, I'm like, this guy's he's got no clue at the plate right now what's going on. Whereas you watch a Tommy Pham and you say, okay, his numbers aren't great right now, but he's hitting the crap out of the ball, and it's going to come around soon. So I liked both Grisham and Frazier. Were difficult in that they lead off. And so you like having those leadoff hitters. But Grisham was just not performing. And the other motivation was that I lost Blake Trine into the DL. And so I wanted to have that 6th reliever to give me some flexibility. So I picked up Phil Maton, who subsequently gave up 3 runs in like a third of an inning. What were your waiver claims for the week?
Do you want me to answer your question?
Yes, please. Sorry.
Well, I'll just use Pham or not a Pham, pardon me. I certainly decided Pham was cut. No, that's not happening. But Grisham, I was excited when I saw him cut. So that's the answer to that. Because do I get excited? Yes. Did his performance this far dissuade me? Yes, it did. But I think even more so, I was not in a position to add another outfielder. So even though, there's some potential there, and I got excited, I'd never really seriously considered adding him. I saw him as recently as last summer, like being ranked as the top like 13 or 14 outfielder for Dynasty. And people I respect and read and consume their content and their ideas. And I have to admit, I've never bought in at that level. And it gave me pause when I saw it. And I'm not saying I'm right and they're wrong, but I think it is interesting when a player who you're not as high on as other people seem to be You think like, what are they seeing that I'm not seeing, or what I'm seeing that they're not seeing? And it's just interesting. I just question if he would ever hit enough. I question if San Diego is ever going to consistently play him against lefties. I question the power because we only really ever saw it in the pandemic season. Like, is he really going to be able to do that over a full season? If he can't do those three things, then his opportunities to steal are going to be limited. So I don't know. He got valued really highly there for a very long, and I listen when we could take a walk. I mean, God knows that's about all my team does at this point is take walks. So, but yeah, I just the apples, the blooms off the rose there. So for me on waivers, as I mentioned, offensively, it was really about Torkelson and having to cut rough. But I have churned quite a bit on the pitching side. I have spent, frankly, too many of my claims already. I really wanted to be more disciplined about that this year, and I'm already down to 30. So I'm really trying to rein that in. This past week, streamed, Spencer Howard, hoping to get 3 innings on Sunday. To try to hold down strikeouts, which that worked. He gave me like 4 strikeouts in 2 innings, and I needed him. But that cost me a waiver claim. I been turning the back end of the bullpen. I picked up Jason Adam and Luis Garcia. Adam, ultimately, I cut again. Garcia, I cut again. And then added Barlow for the Rangers and Adam Simber for Toronto. Simber is a Under Armour, like not Under Armour. Side, what's the baseball term, Tino?
Yeah,
submarine. I don't know if he's pure submarine. He doesn't go that low, but yeah,
he's pretty low.
Yeah, he's pretty low. But you look at the way that San Francisco used Tyler. I get Taylor and Tyler mixed up. Which one plays in San Francisco? Tyler,
I believe.
Tyler. Okay. You look at the way that they use Tyler Roger. I think guys like that, like with that under emotion, I wonder if they're more resilient and can be used more often. And he's been consistently used in the 7th and 8th inning, and his stuff plus is actually quite good. So while that particular style is aesthetically not something I'm drawn to, again, you look at what Tyler Rogers did last year, I think it has to remove, at least for me, remove some of my bias of looking at someone like that because how effective he was. I'm not saying that's what he's going to do, but his role on that team, we talked about the importance of having winning teams for holds.
Mm-hmm.
I have lost holds 2 weeks in a row, so I've continued just to mine. And for me, like Adam was a stuff play. Well, Tampa will use him at all points in the game when they're ahead, when they're behind. And while his stuff plays and he's going to strike people out, he's also, his command hurt me, and I don't know how he'll be used. So as a pitcher, I like him more, but for fantasy, I'm not getting the holds from him because of how he's being used. So, and Barlow, his stuff plus has really popped. And his command is better. I don't know why Texas has taken the approach they have with him. They did this whole thing of like, he's our closer, but he's not going to be our closer yet. I don't know if they're kind of just like being overly careful, if he's like mentally fragile. I don't know, but I know his stuff plus is really good. And I know he's working towards the 9th inning. And Texas is not a good team. But I also know that they've had a lot of leads, that they've blown a lot of leads. So they're good enough to get leads, and maybe it can help hold them. We'll see. That feels like a gas can for my ratios at any point in time. But I need someone else to stack alongside. I can't be completely reliant on Toronto to get all my saves. But and then starting pitcher wise, I had picked up Tyler Anderson as a follower. Now he's a starter. I mentioned I picked up Keegan Aiken as a follower. I picked up Keegan Thompson. Apparently, I love guys named Keegan. As a follower, hoping to get 3 or 4 innings, which I got, and then I cut him again to pick up someone else, and then I picked him back up. So again, I'm just turning too many people. And then I picked up Clark Schmidt, hoping to get a couple innings over the weekend. He never pitched, which I didn't understand. It's not been like 7 days since he's pitched. Mm-hmm. I don't understand why they're waiting so long to pitch him again. I don't think that's good for him. And then I picked up Josh Fleming for this week because he will start twice this week or follow twice this week, and they're at home, and I like that. So
it's against the Mariners, man.
Yeah, he didn't do well yesterday, so we'll see how he does in his second start this weekend against the Twins, or not start, but in his second appearance.
Right.
So right. Yeah, again, I'm just. I think my process is sound. I had to manage through a 6-starter last week. I'm trying to get innings in other places, and but I'm spending too many picks. But I'm excited about. I think Barlow and Garcia, or Barlow and Simber, are better than the other leverage arms I had. I threw Schmidt in the minor spot because his stuff plus really pops. And right now I can't get a feel for how they're going to use him, but I do think there's going to be an opportunity to pitch in New York this year when I thought had Luis Heel out of the draft because he had like Dylan Cease type fastball, curveball, 2-pitch, but he's wild. And Schmidt, I think, is a little bit more polished. And I've always liked Clark, but he's just had one injury after another. So when I saw his stuff plus number for his appearance, I was really interested in grabbing him. And then throw him on the minor league spot for now and see what he does. So yeah,
It's one of the benefits, I think, of, I think, like, so if Patino didn't get hurt for you, right, and you had a predictable 5th or 6th starter, and say you had one more bullpen arm that had a defined role that you could just kind of ride with, you probably would have had maybe 5 to 7 more waiver claims as of right now than you have. And I think it's really an interesting thought that with players that, when you pick players and obviously you pay attention to this like I do, when you have players that have defined roles and even if they're not performing, you still ride with them knowing that it's going to balance out over time. One of the results is that you do get to maintain those waiver claims. So we get 45, right, waiver claims per year.
Yeah.
And they're really valuable, right? And I've had years where I'm out of waiver claims at the end of the year, and it's really impacted my ability to finish. But by having players in defined roles, it allows you to sit on those waiver claims, and you can still be speculative, but it's not at the risk of not having claims at the end of the year. Whereas for you, you're scrambling for pitching because of injuries and, having to spend those claims. So it's just it's an interesting result of having a certain type of player or roster that I don't think I've thought about up until now.
Yeah. And I do think it was a little bit, I won't say a perfect storm, but it was a unique set of circumstances. I think having 5 starters, usually at least one of your starters is going to have 2 starts.
Right.
That becomes your 6th. But just the way it lined up, it didn't happen that way. And honestly, I was fortunate because Tyler Anderson got moved into the rotation.
Mm-hmm.
Because if that hadn't happened, I would have been even more stuck up against it.
Right.
But that did happen, and so that honestly was a little bit of that was a good break, a positive break for me. And while I wasn't thrilled with starting him as San Diego, he performed pretty decently. He couldn't get Jake Cronenworth out. Other than that, he pitched pretty damn well.
Mm-hmm.
But Jake just saw him way too well, and I don't know what's up with that, but he had a hot night on him for sure.
One more pitching thought, and then we'll move on. I don't know what to think about Matt Brash. He's I'm going to ride with him, but he started off. Basically, he's having a difficult time pitching to lefties. And he has, he's got the wipeout curve and slider that right-handers just look like, like they have no idea what's coming. And he's throwing, sitting like 95, 96, but he's 15 innings, 11 hits, 11 walks, 13 Ks. I expected him to have many more Ks than that per inning. And he seems a little bit more hittable than I think we initially thought. I know in the beginning of the year, his stuff plus was right up there as him and Hunter Green, I think, were at the top of the list.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't really know what to make of him. I'm certainly going to hold on to him. And, but it would not be surprised if he continues to pitch the way that he is, if the Mariners brought up George Kirby and moved Brash to a bullpen role within the next month or so. What have you seen from Brash thus far?
I know his last start here, he had let's see, I wrote it down. So 4.4 and a third, 5 hits, 4 walks, 2 Ks, 3 earned runs, 87 pitches against the Royals, 8 swings and misses. That didn't necessarily set up alarm bells. I thought his command is going to come and go a little bit earlier on, kind of like we talked about earlier, not always having your best stuff and him kind of learning how to pitch with that. It's interesting what you said about his splits and what you've seen against him against lefties, because when you said that, I wanted to pull up his pitching plus, because pitching plus takes into account splits. But it looks like I only have him for 85 pitches. So this is not an updated data set, and it only has his first start.
Right.
So I'll have to watch for that when Eno releases it again, when it has a couple more of his starts, and see, because that if he does have a significant split, that pitching plus will show that.
Right.
But I mean, coming out of his first start, his command was 107. So it's clear that wavered a little bit when he had those 4 walks. And I think even the start before that, he had walked, he had no hits, but like 5 or 6 walks through 5 innings. So but he was able to dance around it. So for me, I would be looking at like, are the swings and misses still there? Because that's, I think, what's going to carry him earlier on. And if those started to dip down, that's where I'd be more concerned.
Right.
Because I think the command peaks and valleys are probably just going to come with their profile, at least early on.
So I looked it up, and he's surrendering a 230 versus left-handers, 238, 407, 788 triple slash versus lefties. So he's walking a ton of lefties, right?
I say the on base sounds like he's walking a lot.
And then versus righties, it's 194, 324, 657. So super effective against right-handers, still walking too many, but super effective versus right-handers, and just giving up a ton of walks versus lefties and a little bit more slug. He's going to have to, he's one of those pitchers, we talk about this a lot, but he's one of those pitchers who I just wish had a changeup. Right? If he had a changeup that he could throw to lefties, I think it would really be a game changer for him. But, so far I guess if I was to look at him with a level head, he is what we thought he probably would be, right? Pretty dominant against right-handers, inconsistent, not great versus lefties. His, kind of concerning, his swinging strike rate as of right now, small sample size, right? But can you, any guesses what?
I would guess it's 13%.
9.7%.
Yeah, that's much lower than I would have thought.
And his CSW called a swinging strike is 30.4%. So, I think there's some.
I have less feel of the barometer for that metric, just because I know it's a pitcherless thing, and I'm just not as familiar with that. So it's like, can you just give me like, what is league average for CSW?
No, I don't know league average for CSW, but I can.
It's a stat I've heard more and more. And I know that the pitcherless created it, but I don't have a good feel for what is a good one, what is a poor one.
As of 2020, it was 27.7% was league average. 16.4% swinging strike on those pitches, 11 point. Hold on here. Sorry. Great podcasting. Yeah. So 27.7% in 2019, 27.7%. So if it's based on those numbers, he's slightly above average. Obviously 2019 isn't perfect, but I don't know where I'm at with Matt Brash is I'm going to roster him. I'm going to keep him. I think that at this point in his career, he would be of more value to my fantasy team as a reliever than a starter. And hopefully he figures out how to get some more strikeouts. And I thought of him as just someone who would build strikeouts and be like a 4 ERA pitcher in a big park. But he's got to bring the walks down and figure out lefties. All right, enough on Matt Brash. One other player that I wanted to bring up before we move on to Major League Baseball topics is, will you bring up G-Man Choi on his Savant page for me?
Yeah. Speaking of Gmon, he was one of the bids that we lost last week on TGFBI. I tried to get him.
What did he go for? Do you know?
I have the winning bid saved. Let me pull it up right now. Gmon Choi went for $31.
And we bid how much?
7.
It's funny. Did you bring up his Statcast?
Working right now. I pivoted away to pull up that bid.
I'm interested in your reaction when you see it.
Honestly, the thing that surprises me the most is the K percentage being that high. Because I don't think of someone as someone who swings and misses. However, the thing I'm least surprised by is his sprint speed being 8. But he's a great first baseman, and I saw him stretch out and make a play the other day. It was just unbelievable. And he looks like this sort of heavier set guy that would be a great athlete, but he clearly is. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of red on this page. What did you want to say about him?
Just that.
Yeah.
When I pulled him up, he was 99th percentile average exit, 78th max, 95th percentile hard hit, 96th percentile barrel. You see a player like that and you think like Ronald Acuna or, one of the, obviously again, early in the season, but if those numbers hold up, we're going to see a much better player than we've seen up till now. The only real big change I've seen in his batted ball stuff is that his launch angle is actually lower this year than it's been over the last 5 years. And I wonder if that is.
What is it?
It's 11.2.
Okay.
The previous 2 years, it was 14.8 and 15.7. So I wonder if he's consciously shifted his approach to hit the ball, swing at a little bit more of a level plane. It may just be luck for all we know. Again, it's 53 plate appearances, but there's a heck of a lot of red there.
I just looked at Fantrax to see what his status is. He was picked up on April 14th by Chico's Bail Bonds.
I looked at the same thing. The minute I saw all that red, I looked on Fantrax to see if he was available.
And the thing is, and I always discount Tampa players because I expect them to be platooned so much. And I think he would be at the top of that list of guys who don't play enough to be anything more than like a backup fill-in potentially for you. Right. And the thing that, and I've owned Tampa player. I like Tampa, and I think I have my Tampa hat on today. But I really do like them. But I rostered hitters on their team before because I watch the games and I think highly of their players. And like a lot of times I would need them on a day to backups, as a backup to fill in, they wouldn't be playing. Right. More times than not, it would just hit on a certain day and I wouldn't be able to use them.
Right.
And it just gets to be really frustrating. But like ultimately, like they don't care about our fantasy team. They care about trying to win, and Right. They get maximum value out of all these guys. So looking at, I'm on Roster Resource. He's batting cleanup. He's batted cleanup every day he's played. He's played first every single day. He's had 2 days off, both against lefties. In the last week, he was off the 24th, and they played a lefty, and he was off the 19th. So he's played 4 out of the last 6 days, all the cleanup, all at first base, set against 2 lefties. So seems pretty predictable where he's going to hit right now and when he's going to play.
Right. He was, I was pretty shocked. I don't think of him as that. A player with that type of skill set. So I was quite surprised when I pulled his page up.
I think the other thing that has surprised me is how consistently they've played Josh Lowe. Given how poorly he has performed, and then also they played him against lefties pretty consistently. They have not really platooned him. Now it looks like he set the last lefty they played. He's set, but he's played 5 out of the last 6 days, and that's been pretty consistent with them. And it's surprising both to see them not platoon someone and to see him get continued play time despite the fact that he has struggled so much. He's really struggled, so that's been surprising for me. I'd hoped he'd do better.
I assume that kind of like Julio and then Kelnick last year, with a player that you value as a starter long term, you just want to kind of ride with that player. And I heard a good argument recently about a rookie that struggles, like Josh Lowe or like Julio, that they don't have anything left to prove or to do in the minor leagues. And even if they go to the minor leagues, go to AAA and destroy it, it's still not going to help them hit major league pitching, right? And it's still not going to necessarily help their confidence coming back.
Mhm.
And so the best thing to do, in a lot of people's opinion, is to just keep putting that player out there. You might sit him for a couple of days and let him take it all in, but to keep them in the major leagues and to continue to provide them with the role that you initially did, and trust the talent, and that the talent will win out in the end. And I think we're seeing that more and more with young players, even on a team like Tampa. I think with Tampa too, their decision making, every decision is even more important because of their lack of financial resources. And so, they have even more riding on Josh Lowe succeeding than most teams would.
Right.
But it's very interesting. Do you want to cover TGFBI for a couple minutes, or should we take a quick break first?
Let's do a couple of minutes and then we'll take a break. How's that?
Sounds
I
great.
think for me, the things I wrote down, we didn't have a good week. Our lineup was 12th last week. Our hitting was 12th in the league, and that dropped us. However, on the positive side, our bullpen really started to produce some saves for us, and we've had that potential. So it's just nice to get in that column and start to climb up the ranks there. And I'm confident that's going to continue. Yeah, but hitting wise, we just didn't do well enough. Stott got demoted, only played one game last week, and he was stuck in our lineup. This is a weekly lineup league. I put in bids on Jimon Choi this past week, as well as one other player. I think was Gavin Sheets. I'd have to look at our bid list just to try to get another bat in the lineup. Missed out on both those bids. Those players were valued higher than I thought they would be. Our team batting average last week was 235, and we had 6 players hit below 220. So not indifferent from a lot of other squads. We just didn't hit last week. But yeah, and I think as we talked about offline, Tino and I are going to work on just being more proactive and better at the FAB process and make sure that we're really tweaking the end of our roster very well. It's been an adjustment for me. I don't know how you feel about it, but I'm so confident we didn't have a good week. But again, I'm encouraged by the bullpen, and I'm encouraged that we're going to figure out a way to better, again, work the end of our roster. And I'm encouraged that Cunha is coming back. As I stand by what I said. If we're in the top half of the league when he comes back, we're getting our first round pick, and that's a great place to start.
Right. And I do think we'll see O'Neal Cruz sooner rather than later.
And that would be wonderful.
That'll be huge, right? We've got a minor league Bryson Stott in the place that we expected O'Neal Cruz to be. So it'll be interesting. I think that we drafted I think our team has a lot of really consistent performers. We didn't take a ton of chances. We took a couple of calculated risks with Acuna being injured and J-Rod and a couple of upside plays. But the reality is that we have a lot of consistent performers in Schwarber and Ketel Marte and Machado and Lindor and Votto. And I think we're going to be okay. I would be surprised if we didn't finish, top 5 or kind of in that range. I think we have a really good team. We just have to ride it out.
Cool.
So let's take a quick break, and we'll come back with our Major League Baseball topics and our deep dive.
Great.
And we're back. Umpires. What do you think when I say umpires 2022? What's your first reaction?
I love Kyle Schwarber.
Mm-hmm.
I love that whole thing that he did the other night. It's cool to see why he's so well respected. I love that he pointed to both dugouts.
Why don't you share with the listeners what exactly Kyle Schwarber did?
He was called out on a third strike. That was well outside. I think it was pretty clear from the camera angle that I saw behind the picture. It was outside. Yeah, he he stood over home plate facing the umpire and basically pointed out like you've missed up high, down too high, up below, to the left, to the right, and then he pointed to both dugouts, both sides, basically saying like this goes both ways, and just kind of like standing up. I just thought it was really, I just love that he included both teams. And obviously the game was over at that point. I think he made the last out, but yeah, it was a pretty epic rant, and I love Schwarber.
It was, I love the fact that he said basically you're crap and you miss calls on both ends. I've seen it a lot with Julio Rodriguez. It's well documented that he's getting called out on all kinds of horrible calls. So I have a conspiracy theory to run by you. I wonder if, because the bad umpiring has been across the board, right? It's not, obviously Angel Hernandez is the worst, but it's been across the board. Willow, stop. But I wonder if there's been an edict from Major League Baseball for umpires to call a larger strike zone in an effort to get batters to put the ball in play more and swing more, right? Because the natural adjustment, if there's pitches that are consistently being called strikes that are 3 inches outside of the zone, for you to start swinging at them and maybe trying to, take them to the opposite field or adjust your swing or your approach a little bit to compensate. And I do wonder, because the smaller the zone gets, the easier it is to, obviously a pitcher has to start coming straight down the middle. And at that point, you can start to create a little bit more loft in your swing and have a swing that doesn't stay in the zone quite as long, because you have a smaller target for where the ball is going to actually be. So my conspiracy theory is that Major League Baseball said to the umps, we want you to call more strikes in an effort to create more small ball or more offense, right? That's not run based. I don't know if that's true or not, but I see last year, I feel like there were a lot fewer borderline calls and a lot fewer egregious strike calls. And this year it's just, Angel Hernandez is like, it's 25% of his strike calls are actually balls. It's horrible.
Right.
It's horrible.
Well, I know the efforts to speed up the game that's tangible, that's real, that's documented. So I'm just looking at O-Swing. I had downloaded some data for my player deep dive, and I'm just looking at players who aren't chasing to see like how successful they are, because I wonder if is there a connection between guys who are hitting well and guys who aren't chasing, who aren't necessarily, to follow your theory, they're being encouraged to swing more.
Right.
Is that really yielding a lot of great results? And I'm looking down the list of number 2 is Seiya Suzuki. He's doing great. Bregman is doing great. Soto's on the list. Outside of that, I'm looking at these names. I don't see a lot of names that are doing that well. So yeah, maybe they're trying to get guys to swing. Maybe it's working.
And I do think it would probably take a little bit of time, like a little bit more time to see if that's actually something that's happening, but it definitely is noticeable, right? It's noticeable that the umpires are not calling the zone that, at least the zone that we're presented. They're not calling.
Right. Yeah. It's tough.
Do you, any young pitchers that you've been impressed with or you've been enjoying?
I was impressed with Lodolo's last start. I will say that. He doesn't have premium velocity, and I'm not trying to make a comp, but I'm just saying he was someone that kind of like a Detmer, someone who is perceived to have more polish, maybe not, but not as high of a ceiling. But his last start against the Cardinals, who are, I think, as we talked about in our last pod, really gave Ashby fits, and they're just a tough lineup. And in terms of their approach and what they do at the plate, going 5 2/3, getting 11 swings and misses, only 79 pitches to get through 5 2/3 to me is impressive as well. 7 strikeouts, only 1 walk, and I think that was was that his second or third start?
Third start.
His second.
His third.
Third, okay. Yeah, that was an impressive start, but to me, you got to string them together, but that one stuck out to me. We talked about Brash a little bit. Hunter Green's last start, his velocity was way down.
Mhm.
And it concerns me, honestly, because usually that's an indicator of a health issue. So I don't know what to make. I hope he's healthy. And I don't know if they need to give him like an extra day every time through. If he just wasn't feeling it physically, if he was under the weather. But it stuck out to me. He went 3 1/3, 4 hits, 4 walks, only 6 swings and misses. He didn't look himself.
I wonder if I was the Reds pitching coach, and you wouldn't necessarily make this adjustment on the fly, but I wonder if he eased off the velocity slightly and maybe got a little bit more movement on his. I'd like to see the movement on his pitches last game, because oftentimes if a pitcher, because his fastball is obviously it's 100 miles an hour, but it's straight as an arrow, and so it gets hit pretty hard. Could it be, I doubt it, but could it be that he eased off a little bit in an effort to get a little bit more wiggle on the fastball so that's a little less hittable? I don't know. But I was concerned too. And I'd be really sad if Hunter Green, if there was something wrong, because he's such a dynamic pitcher and so much fun to watch.
Yeah.
What about McClanahan?
He's been really good. I mean, he's been really good so far. He seems like he's ascending. His ground ball rate is up. His velocity is up. He certainly seems like he's taken that next step. I have not seen any of his starts live yet. I've just read about them and looked at the results. So I listened to quite a bit of Tampa on the radio, so I've heard it. Heard him call his games. So he certainly has had a good start.
Right. So you covered the ones that I had on my list.
They were on the rundown. You deserve the credit for that.
Interestingly, Lodolo was actually my pitcher deep dive. So he's 1-2 with the 5.52 ERA, but his xERA is 3.56. 19 strikeouts and 14 2/3 innings. His X stats are pretty league average. But it's interesting, his curve and his change are not plus pitches as of right now, but his sinker is such a good pitch. I wonder if he's going to be able to live off that sinker until he figures out a second pitch. To your point, it's 94.2 miles an hour average, and he throws it 59% of the time. But it has 17.8 inches of horizontal break. So which is 15% above league average. So basically it's a sink, more like a horizontal two-seamer in some ways. But he's getting 46.5% ground ball off the in general. And it's already a -2 run value pitch after 3 starts.
And which pitch is this? Sinker, curve, or change?
His sinker.
Sinker, okay.
So it's a high quality pitch, right?
Yeah, I'm surprised. I mean, in his last start, I'm looking at the box I saved for it. He 30% with 30% swing and miss on it. I mean, that's high for a sinker.
Yep, super high. The other thought is, so he's throwing his curve, which is an 82.5 mile an hour average. He's throwing it 20.6% of the time, and his change 19.8% of the time, which is 88 miles an hour. I bring up the velocity because usually effective sinker ball pitchers, you see them throw a sinker slider and those 2 pitch velocities are typically closer together. So one pitch goes left and the other pitch goes right. But with the difference in velocity with the curveball, sinker curveball, I wonder if he would benefit from throwing a slider instead of the curve. I'd love to know why it is that he throws a curveball instead of a slider. I assume the slider is just not an effective pitch for him. The only other pitcher I can remember having that mix is Jonathan Loizaga. See who throws like basically turbo sinker and curveball. But what I found with Lodolo is he's a really fun watch, right? Because he's 6'6" and skinny, he reminds me of Chris Sale, not in the type of pitcher they are. They throw really different pitches, but that fun, funky, tall left-handed pitcher that's difficult to pick up. And has a pitch that's just a really premium elite pitch in the sinker. His upside for me is major league number 2. I don't think he's a 1 unless he really does find a plus second pitch. And a fantasy, probably 3 or 4 kind of middle rotation pitcher with a high strikeout, but he pitches in Cincinnati. And I hate pitchers in that park, right? It's the one thing about Hunter Green that made me nervous, is probably the defining factor as to why I let him go after this offseason, is Cincinnati is such a brutal pitch to park in, or park to pitch in, excuse me. But Lodolo's fun. Lodolo has become a must watch for me, even if it's just the condensed game, but I want to see Lodolo pitch every 5 days. It's a pretty cool pitcher. So I have on the list, a long list of injuries to cover. I don't think we have to cover all of those injuries. Are there any players or injury updates that are important to you that you want to cover here?
To me, you buried the lead. To me, the biggest injury news last week was that Byron Buxton came back. Thank goodness. And then India came back last night, which honestly, I didn't realize he was that close. The other ones, I think they're 3 or 4, Presley, Cobb, Taiwan Walker are all scheduled to come back this week.
Eloy Jimenez going down for 8 weeks was, I feel bad for him.
That was, I don't want to throw labels like injury prone on people. I just start to wonder, he's just a large human being. I'm just not sure.
Well, that's my initial thought with Jimenez is, if he's in better shape, essentially, would he have gotten hurt in that situation? And is that something that the White Sox are going to have him do? And then if they do have him get in better shape, is it going to impact his performance at all? John Means is out for the season. It looks like we rostered him in TGFBI, correct?
No. Draft and hold.
Draft and hold. So even worse. That was too bad. Looks like Luis Castillo is kind of on the mend.
Yeah.
And then the other ones that were interesting to me, Sonny Gray went on the injured list. Casey Mize went on the injured list. There's a lot of those. DeSclafani.
A lot of pitchers on this list, man. A lot of pitchers.
And a lot of the innings eater type guys that are middle of the rotation.
Yep.
Who would appear fantasy wise to be replaceable because there are a lot of pitchers that are like that, but those pitchers are rostered, right? And so an injury like that, if you were counting on a John Gray or an Alex Cobb to be your number 4, your number 5, as you very clearly presented with Patino as your 6, it's not easy to replace those guys at all. I do wonder if that will change if we continue to see this rate of injuries to pitchers, if we might see a little different roster construction in the future, where, as you did last year, that fantasy managers are more likely to roster 1 or 2 extra starters, understanding that you're going to lose 1 or 2 of them along the way.
Yeah, it's and this wasn't on our agenda, but another MLB topic is the roster cut down that's happening.
Right.
In like 4 days. They're going from 20 to 26, and most teams utilize those 2 spots to carry additional pitchers. So they're going to, lose probably, a bullpen arm and probably like a long relief arm, most likely.
I wonder if we'll see starters go a little bit longer because of it too.
Yeah, I think they're going to have to.
I don't really see any other injuries here. There were some light injuries. Riley Green not not coming back for a while is a bit disappointing. There was so much hype around him when he
I was asking, he was one of the ones I had highlighted of like, just, is there any updates on him? Like, how's his foot doing? I hadn't heard anything.
the latest update that I have here for Riley Green is that his recovery from a fractured right foot could last longer than the initial 6 to 8 weeks. So if you take 6 to 8 weeks from the beginning of the season, you're looking at what, June, I guess, as his targeted return. So for those who invested heavily in him at the beginning of the offseason, obviously that was essentially a sunk cost. Those are the only ones of interest. I am interested to see what happens with the Giants injuries. If Longoria coming back, if he's gonna have the hard hit rate that he had, or barrel rate. I forgot which one it was that was so great last year, but he had great contacts or power skills. And then Lamont Wade, I think, is a forgotten player who's on his way back as well. So we'll see. And then for me, obviously, with Acuna coming back and Tatis starting to be on the mend, I think he took some grounders, is what I saw. That's going to be, I'm excited to, just as a fan, to see them come back. We grabbed the Tatis. Tatis simulated fielding ground balls and made throws in the infield on Monday.
A couple of guys who are actively playing, but their teams are taking it really slow with them. Luis Urias and Clevenger. So both of them are healthy enough to play and are playing on a regular schedule. But in both cases, the teams have said we're taking a really conservative approach. So I think that's kind of obviously positive that they're playing, but for fantasy wise, we're going to have to wait a little bit longer to get those returns. I'm really eager to get him back on our roster where we have him together, because he can play everywhere, and just eager to see him take that next step.
Right. Injuries suck. It's kind of what it comes down to. Injuries it's hard. And I think I talked about this before. It's why I don't play, why I play less fantasy football now, is injuries are the biggest determinant of whether you win or not. And I hope that doesn't happen with pitching. I am fascinated to see what happens with pitching over the next couple of years if teams take a different approach because of their propensity for injury. All right, enough of the depressing injury stuff. Player deep dive. Who was your pitcher?
So before I say my pitcher, I want to tell you a little bit about what I chose to do to try to decide who I wanted to talk about. So what I did was I looked at xwOBA. The differences, variances between weighted on base and expected weighted on base. You can use an expected stats to try to lean through underperformers, overperformers thus far. And so I looked at players who had who the xwOBA suggested they have positive regression coming, that they've performed better than their surface stats indicate. And then the second filter I ran was K minus BB. So of which of those pitchers who are underperforming their ratios have a good strikeout to walk ratio. So with that, Aaron Nola was the player that popped for me, he's a recurring point of conversation on our podcast. So I thought it'd be interesting to just take a quick look at what he's done so far. He had a couple mediocre starts early on, but his K minus BB to this point is 23.8%. Let's pitch him at number 10 overall. The list goes Kershaw, Kyle Wright, Carlos Rodon, Shea McClanahan, we just talked about, Kevin Gausman, Joe Musgrove, Corbin Burns, Carlos Carrasco, kind of a surprise entry, and Max, and then Nola. So he's in the top 10 in K minus BB. And he was second in expected wOBA difference. And I don't remember who the first one was, but it was kind of a Tyler Mahle, who I didn't really want to talk about. So his K minus BB was only 12.7%. So he didn't meet my criteria. I wanted someone who was still performing in that key metric along with that. So looking at what he's done so far, it's kind of not dissimilar from last year. He has a sub 1 whip right now, 25 strikeouts through 21 and 2/3. His ERA is in the high 3s, but his xERA is in the low 2s or mid 2s, pardon me. So yeah, it was just really encouraged to see that the stats back up that he did have some issues early on, but that the core skills are still there. But also I think part of me wonders, is there something about his arsenal that the way that these things are tracked that just overrates him? Because it does seem like he every 3 or 4 starts, and this is the first year I've rostered him, where I'll be watching more closely, but from afar, more in recent seasons, it just seemed like he is prone to these poor starts. And his velocity and stuff is not such where he can necessarily pitch through if he's having an off day, or if he gets overused, which I think Giardi frankly did with him last year a couple different times. He left him in way too long because he didn't trust his bullpen with good reason. So he wanted Nola to get a few more outs maybe than he should have asked of him a couple times last year, but hopefully that doesn't happen this year with Dominguez and Knebel back there. Hopefully he'll go to his bullpen. But stuff wise, he's really the same as last year. He's at 105.5 right now. Last year he was at 100.2. Location 108.7. Last year he was 105. And then pitching plus he's at 101 so far this year. He was at 103 last year. So skills wise, he's either just slightly up or basically the same. So nothing earth shattering, but just encouraging to see him pop on this list. See the skills staying the same, and know that high 3s ERA is, and also to see that sub 1 whip is also great to see.
Did you look at his pitch shape or velocity at all?
Nope, not specifically for this.
I asked because the one number that popped when I pulled up his Fangraphs is his ground ball rate is 58% this year. And last year it was 40.5. And then the previous 2 years it was 49.7. And so this is obviously, he's only had 3 starts, but it's the highest ground ball rate that he's had in his career so far. And so I immediately wanted to know, is he throwing a sinker more? Did he change, or a 2-seamer? Did he change the shape on the 2-seamer at all? And what does that do? So I guess to rewind, if you see a pitcher increase their ground ball rate by 17.5%, what is your initial thought, and what do you do with that information? Because we put a lot of information out there, but I don't know that we always walk through what that actually means.
Yeah, so to me, a reduction or an increase in the ground ball rate is a positive indicator. So much like if someone had increased velocity, that stat like with ground ball rate going up, to me, that would make them more compelling, make me more likely to want to trade for them, to pick them up, to trust them in a difficult matchup. That sort of ground ball lean is something to me that's advantageous. So that would be a key indicator for me of increasing my interest in trying to either, again, trust that player to play or acquire them if I didn't have them.
We talk about elite pitchers who have high ground ball rates and high strikeout rates, or high swing and miss. That's a really elite combination. And then K minus BB as the other one that I think we gravitate towards really quickly. I don't see there's no difference in his sinker velocity, nor its vertical or horizontal movement versus last year's. Horizontal movement is 1.2 inches less on the sinker this year than it was last year. It could be a different pitch that he's getting ground balls on. It doesn't necessarily have to be the sinker itself, but I just found it really interesting that there was that much of a difference in
No, that's a great catch.
Ground ball rate versus last year. Yeah, there's no significant difference in vertical movement really with any of his pitches. So I wonder what it is. I'd also be interested in location. I don't know if there's a way for us to understand location difference, that maybe he's pitching lower in the zone consciously. But something's going on. But yeah, he may be one of those pitchers that we always see elite skills, but we don't necessarily see elite results year over year. I like it. So that was a good find. And do you have a hitter?
I do. So similar rubric, different metrics. So with hitters, I wanted to look at guys whose expected slug was underperforming based on the quality of their contact. And then I filtered that by also looking at hard hit rate and chase rate. So guys who are hitting the ball hard, who are not chasing, and whose X slug says that they're underperforming. And so the player that, huh?
The Tommy fam.
I need to sort this differently. So the player I want to talk about was Jose Abreu. Tommy Pham was on this list. I want you to know. His X slug was how many? He was number. I'm not going to tell you the number one player because we don't like him, so we'll skip that. But see, Tommy was. Oh, come on, show me the cell count. 19. He was 19th on this list.
Cool.
So top 20 for underperformers based on quality of contact. But I want to highlight Abreu because we talked about him quite a bit in the first base pod. And I think as I shared an episode recently, I went back and listened to some of those podcasts. So seeing Abreu on this list kind of popped that memory. So his hard hit right now is 60.5%, and his O swing is only 22.6%.
Wow.
So that's quite good. There was a player who met both those qualifications who was right above him, but it was Miguel Sano. His hard hit rate is at 50%, and his O swing is actually lower at 16.9. But his XBA is below 200, and I just didn't necessarily want to. We know what Sano is, and it's impressive that he doesn't chase, but he also doesn't make a ton of contact. So whereas Abreu, we're looking at, before the season, going back, was projected for like a 262, 347, 831 type line with a 10.2% barrel rate. That's kind of what we expected. We talked about him specifically, like he's someone who's an accumulator. He's someone who is going to carry you in RBIs, which is a stat that can be challenging to garner. And while he may be lagging in comparison to some of his top first base peers in terms of some of the contact metrics, he had more of that intangible coming up with the timely hit, putting the ball in play, and getting counted on to get those runs for you. But he is outperforming, he is excelling in some of those quality of contact metrics right now. So his K rate is holding steady. He's been in that 21 to 22% range consistently the last 4 years, and that's where he is again. His walk rate is slightly up. I already mentioned the quality of contact. As I mentioned, his X slug is 621 based on the quality of his contact. So he's slugging right now 382, but his X slug is 621. His average exit is 94.5. So his XBA is 266. And again, we projected him for a 262. So that's in line with where he is for his career. But to me, if he's going to have one of these years where he spikes a great barrel rate and is hitting the ball this hard, he's going to exceed, I would expect, some of the power numbers maybe that we would have expected from him earlier in the season. So again, you look at him, this I think was more successful than my other deep dive in finding a player that, like, looking at his surface numbers, if you just look up the box score, right now he's a 218, 306, 382. Or excuse me, 218, 306, 688. Is that a player you want to go acquire? Maybe not really. But when I look at these numbers and the difference between his quality of contact and his track record and what he's doing, like, to me, this is someone I would want to try and go out and get. Or if I had him on my roster and I was, instead of crying in my coffee, I would be encouraged that this is a short term, and he actually is going to outperform what I even expected of him based on the preseason. So yeah, really interesting to see him pop on this list.
Is this an exercise that you utilize to find your next player or your next potential waiver claim or your next trade target?
These are tools I use to now analyze my own roster. I do look at stats like this for players, but I think right now I have not been in acquisition mode, specifically with hitters. But yes, in the past I have, but like right now it's more self-scouting. But I think if we could dig deeper, like making even decisions about like TGFBI and things like that, for potential free agent ads. Could do more of that for sure.
I wonder with Abreu, age is a thing too, right? Where he's, I think 35, I want to say. And, I always wonder, like, if I was in Chicago, I would want to know, like, did he have LASIK eye surgery? Is there a difference in approach? What's leading to him being able to have, better or harder contact? Because obviously age does not help that, right? Aging does not help you hit the ball harder. And I always want to know what the adjustment is attributed to.
Mhm.
And so first step is finding those players, right? Completing the exercise that you did. The next step for me is I want to know why, right? It's looking, I will go look at, White Sox blogs or, White Sox newspapers, or, even for me at times it's calling a friend in Chicago. But one of my fraternity brothers is in Chicago and is a huge White Sox fan. It's calling Calzonzi and saying, hey man, like, what's going on with the Abreu? And I know that sounds silly, but whatever I can do to figure out why the numbers say what they do, because it could just be that he's getting lucky, right?
Mhm.
Obviously, the longer it goes during the season, the more likely it is that it's something real. But I still want to know what it is before I act on
Right.
it.
I don't know. I mean, I don't tend to think of like barrels as something you luck into. Like maybe you luck into like BABIP or some stuff like that. But that kind of quality of contact, I don't know.
Right.
But maybe.
But I don't look. I didn't mean to say that Abreu was getting lucky, but I
No,
want
no, no.
to
Yeah.
know, as definitively as possible that it's something that he's changed and it's sustainable and not just a blip.
Yeah, that's
So
great. Kind of like
my
the
hitter
narrative.
uh, is, and I really was pretty arbitrary with my deep dives. I just thought, okay, this is a player that I'm interested in knowing a little bit more about. And so that's why I picked Lodolo as one. And because he's a pretty unique pitcher. The hitter is Jeremy Pena, 24-year-old shortstop rookie for the Houston Astros. Thus far, 66 plate appearances. He has 10 runs, 14 hits, 3 homers, 7 RBIs, no steals. And his triple slash is 246, 323, and his OPS is 814. I wanted to know, I think my hesitation with Pena heading into the season was, is he a prospect that is towards the top of the Astros list because their farm system has been thinned out and weakened, and he's going to have a position because Correa left and not because of his skills? Or is he actually a talented player who deserves attention from the fantasy baseball world, and is a shortstop that's worth watching and potentially rostering? So far this season, I'm just going to do percentile ranks off of Savant. His average exit is in the 75th percentile. His max is 78th, hard hit 70th, XBA 53rd, X slug 84th, barrel is 91st, and then K is 55th and walk is 47th. The one challenging percentile was his chase rate, was in 12th percentile, but he's also, a rookie. And the surprising one was that his sprint speed was in the 96th percentile. So what does that say? He's making really good contact, right? Above average as far as hitting the ball hard. And he's really, really, really fast. So he doesn't have any steals as of yet. And I think his highest steal number in the minors was 20 steals in 2019 in A and high A. I don't know that his sprint speed will necessarily translate into stolen bases, but I do think you can probably expect double-digit steals if he plays a full season. So he's seeing a lot of breaking pitches. Currently 42.9% ground ball rate, 10.2 degree launch angle. He's only seeing 32% fastballs. but he's hitting the fastball and the slider pretty well. It's the sinker and the curve that are giving him trouble. And his first pitch swing rate was only 16%, which I found really interesting, meaning he's taking a lot of first pitches. Again, what does all this mean? He looks like a slightly above average shortstop with the potential for more, right? If he's able to hit the ball hard and he's fast, and he's able to hit both the fastball and the slider as a right-handed hitter, I think there's potential for him to grow into a not just a slightly above average, but a really above average shortstop, fantasy wise, like a 2020 type guy. Is he Trevor Story? I don't think he has that much power, but he has a similar type of toolkit, right? Great athlete, good prospect, organization that is very, I'd say, advanced minded. Like they get how to develop hitting. He's got a position in the on the team. I think they're the way that their payroll is constructed, they really do need to have a couple of players that are kind of rookies those first 6 years, right? Either arbitration or rookie salary. I would not be surprised to see, given his opportunity and his talent, I would not be surprised to see Jeremy Pena be a top 12 or a redraft starting shortstop heading into next season. What do you think of all that information?
Yeah, it was interesting what you said about the first pitch strike. He's only getting pitches in the zone 45.8% of the time. So, and he does bat in the bottom of the order. So,
I think that's a typical approach to your kind of explosive type young players. Is first step is, let's see if he chases, right? Let's see if we have to throw him strikes.
Yeah, and you mentioned, I mean, his chase rate is above the average, but I think the one thing that gives me pause, and I'll say what I'm emboldened by, the one thing that gives me pause is his zone contact right now is 86%. That seems like a little above his talent based on my understanding of his pedigree and his hit tool. The power doesn't necessarily surprise me based on, again, what I understood about what he could potentially bring. That zone contact rate seems a little high to me, and I expect maybe that might come down. But what I'm encouraged by is he's already scored 10 runs. And part of the reason that Jeremy Pena was appealing to us is being in that team context. And so even though he's batting at the bottom of the order, the length of that lineup, he's getting on base enough at the bottom of the order to score runs as they roll it over to the top. So to me, to have that come through, and then also he is 96 percentile on outs above average. So what we heard about him as well is his glove is going to be something that keeps him on the field. And to your point about him potentially being top 12, to me, that's plays a part in that, because getting everyday at bats is in the modern game is something that is valuable. So his glove plays at a high level, keeps him in the lineup. He's in a positive lineup that hits from top to bottom. And so I would anticipate maybe a little bit more volatility with his batting average. But maybe the scouts just got it wrong. Maybe he will be a better hitter than they thought. But the power and the speed are exciting, and to me, that's why he was worth a flyer. And I'm glad that we have a share in our draft and hold.
I look at, so I just pulled up my shortstop rankings heading into the season, and my thought was, where would I, knowing what I know now, where would I put Pena for the remainder of the season? And I have Wander Franco way too low, which makes me really sad. I actually had him at the top of tier 4, number 9, and he looks like a probably top tier guy. I'd Witt at 10. Let me know if you would put Pena in any of these spots. I had Witt at 10, Adames at 11, Crawford at 12.
Yes.
Swanson at 13. So you put him above Crawford?
Yes.
I think that's fair. As much as I don't want to admit it, since Crawford is currently my starting shortstop until Tatis comes back. Torres at 14, Ahmed Rosario 15, Rojas 16.
Yes.
And in the honorable mention, I had VR, Barrero, JP Crawford, De Jong, Escobar, Nicky Lopez, IKF, Jimenez, Horner, and Walls. So yeah, I think Pena comfortably would be probably below Adames and Witt and above Crawford and Swanson. Interesting.
Yeah. And I think about, we were really close. Like he was on our board for TGFBI at the very end, and what he went like, I don't know, it's just so close. Those things come down sometimes to just like a few picks. Like we were so close to getting him, and it's just hard not to think about the difference he'd be making for us right now.
He's
But
it's funny because I'm watching him play a little bit. I typically hate every Houston Astro.
yeah,
And I actually really liked watching Jeremy Pena play, and I'm rooting for him, even though he's an Astro. Do you know who his dad is?
Eric Pena.
I think it's
No,
Geronimo Pena. Do you remember Geronimo Pena?
Geronimo Pena. I
Yeah.
don't.
So he was a utility infielder, like no hit, decent glove infielder for the Cardinals. And I didn't know that was his dad until they showed him in the stands early on in the season. I thought that was kind of funny because one, Geronimo Pena was a random player who I remember from my childhood, and two, it made me feel really old that Geronimo Pena's son is a player that I'm watching and scouting. But that one was a fun deep dive for me, and I'm excited to see what he does moving forward.
Yeah. I know we need to close out,
Yeah.
but last thing I want to add is, I think in this, the format is the format, and every format is different. And I think you're in a similar spot as me. When you have a shortstop you're committed to me, like in Fantrax, we only play one shortstop, and there's no middle infield. And so with someone like Pena, who is only shortstop eligible, and you have someone at shortstop, for me, it disincentivizes rostering him to put him on the bench, knowing like how often you're going to play him. Certainly drafting value is value. You can always try to trade, but I don't necessarily go into the draft or the opportunity to get Pena, and say, okay, well, I can trade him. You know what I mean? Like you're thinking about building your roster. So just one of the dynamics, because I really liked Pena, but I didn't really strongly consider him because I had a shortstop. You know what I mean? And so unless you have someone who has that multi-eligibility, that you can slide him into another spot where you might be able to utilize him. That makes it tough.
I agree. But I would add that my perspective is that, well, one, yeah, if a player is valuable to someone else, he's worth having on your roster. In that you can use that player to fill holes if need be. And I probably tend to do that too much. I think I did that with Grisham to a certain extent. But the other thing is, at least for me in the shortstop position, I look at, like, I really love Fernando Tatis, right? And Tatis probably has the highest upside of any player in fantasy baseball. He could hit 50 home runs and steal 30 bases, literally, at shortstop. But if he continues to be injured, or I get fed up with the injury possibility, having someone like Jeremy Pena, if he does become what we think he could become, right, or he reaches the 90th percentile of his potential, would allow me to turn Tatis into, to improve my team really in a really extreme manner at other positions. And so I do think it's worth, I want to know about as many players as I can. I want to have as much information as I can, so that if the time comes for me to trade someone like Fernando Tatis, I have someone to replace him, right? So agreed that in Fantrax, we don't have that middle infield position. And so there's less incentive to roster or even understand a player like Jeremy Pena. But in the case of someone like Fernando Tatis, I may trade him at some point, right? And so I don't know. I think that there's reason to know as much as possible about those guys. But
Yeah.
part of why I bring it up is I think one of my misgivings is that I will look at players, I will roster talent and players too much without regard for roster construction and
Yeah.
flexibility. It's something that I've talked about in the past that I used to do all the time.
Yeah.
that I'm trying to do less of. So Pena would be an example of one of those players that I'd be too tantalizing for me to not have, but would lose matchups because I had a player that wasn't giving me any return in the immediate. So
Well, listen, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm gonna do
go
it
ahead.
anyway. So, do you have any recollection of when he was selected in our draft? Because it hurts me a little bit. I don't know if it's gonna hurt you. I'm curious. Do you
I'm
remember
guessing
it?
it's way at the end. I want to say that it was like round 10. Was it
Yeah,
like,
you overshot that. It was round 7, pick 7,
okay, still very, for us, very, very
right in
low.
the middle. And how many picks did you and I have?
I had almost all my picks prior.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's and I was thinking, okay, well, what was I thinking about during that time? Well, I had a pick near the end of the 6th, and I used it to take Mateo,
Mhm.
who again is quad eligible. And I took as a categorical speed. Again, I'm saying that was right or wrong. I should have taken Pena, but you see what he's doing now, and you're thinking, okay,
Right,
but how many times would I have gotten to use him?
right.
You
So
know,
you said you pick what, 7?
round 7, pick 7.
Yeah. So prior to that, I picked in reverse order Luis Patino, Andrew McCutcheon, Dustin May, Tyler Glasnow, Tamar Johnson, Brandon Belt, Brandon Crawford, Matt Brash, Luis Urias.
Hmm.
The case could be, so I picked Urias knowing that I needed a shortstop and a second baseman, but could I have used pick 115 for really anything else and then picked Pena in round 7, right?
Yeah,
Hindsight's 2020, but it is very
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. It's I liked him. I liked him the most of those young shortstops who had a chance to break camp, and just it stings a little when you are right or your belief has come to fruition and you don't see the benefit. But that's the way it goes.
Yep. Yep. And I feel like I'm more wrong than I'm right, but I'm going to keep trying,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, for sure.
So we've got about 10 minutes left. Any baseball stories that you want to share that have been fun for you or exciting for you?
Yeah, my baseball story from last week was Wednesday night last week, I believe it was Wednesday or Thursday. I woke up for work and I got a perfect game notification on my phone, which it's not uncommon that you get those pop up. So she get to the 5th or 6th inning, a no hitter, a perfect game. But I opened my phone and I went to the MLB at bat, and it was Shohei. And I was like, shit. And I knew he played. I knew he was pitching against the Astros, and the Astros are giving him fits. So I'm like immediately I turn the game on, and I see like his 5th inning, and then he starts the 6th, and then I think he gave up a hit there, but the one out in the 6th, and he ended up walking someone and then getting out of the inning. But and then the whole rest of the broadcast, they were, once he left the game, they were going back and talking about it and what he did. And I'm ashamed to say I still haven't went back to rewatch that game. It's been on my list of things to do, but this is my 8th straight day. And that day was included in there. So I have not had a day off, but I'm going to go back and watch that game from start to finish. And I just, it was a miraculous performance. And, Joe Madden loves him some Joe Madden, and he says some stupid shit sometimes, but listen to his post game. He basically just said, he had a different intensity today. He's tired of the Astros getting the best of him, and he really wanted to make a statement. And just to see an athlete be able to do that, to dial it up another level against a team that again has given him a hard time and get a win in their building, it was really awesome. Because like you, I don't like that team, and I love him, and I just think he continues to be, his pitching in particular. It just is underappreciated, in my opinion. I saw more news about his socks this week than I heard about what he did on the mound last time. Right. It was like that night, of course, it was a head-on in MLB, and it's just like forgotten. He's not talked about.
Right.
But his stuff plus is way up this year. His command gains have held from last year. His velocity is up. I know he worked really hard in the offseason. I don't think it was Driveline. It was another pitching lab, but he worked really hard. And he and Stassi spent a lot of time together as well. So, he's a force right now.
I caught a little bit of that start, and I guess I just think of him as a hitter. I know, obviously I know that he pitches, but I don't think about his pitching as much. And especially the splitter, it's just he is much must-watch TV. He really is. I already shared my story, which is the Buxton homer. That was about 10 days ago, but it was, I saw it live, and I don't know that I can't remember seeing a home run on a fastball at someone's eyes that was 100 miles an hour, 100-mile-an-hour pitch. It was, in the moment, it was unbelievable. The series that I'm looking forward to is pretty predictable. It's Mariners at Marlins, which is Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It'll be cool to see the Mariners in. I'm not a big interleague fan. In fact, I wish there was no interleague. I miss the days of the novelty of seeing American and National League players on the same field. I think that proved to be the death of the Major League All-Star game. Is there was such novelty in seeing those players on the same field, and now it's not novel anymore. But seeing the Mariners in Florida is kind of cool and kind of random. So that'll be fun. And I have I roster all three Mariner starters in Fantrax. So it's Brash on Friday, Robbie Ray on Saturday, and Logan Gilbert on Sunday. So needless to say, I'll be watching the Mariners Marlins series this upcoming week.
I love it. So yeah, the series I have tabbed, and I as I mentioned, I'm on a long stretch of work, and then I'm off for 4 days starting Friday. So I intend on consuming a lot of baseball, and so I had circled Houston at Toronto, Minnesota at I wrote down, is that Tampa? Yeah, Tampa. Okay, because they're playing the Marlins. I questioned myself because you were just talking about the Seattle being in Florida, and I was like, I thought I may have made a mistake.
Mhm.
Yeah, so Minnesota at Tampa. I already talked about on our thread this morning how much I've been enjoying watching Minnesota. The Phillies at the Mets, little East Coast bias, but that should be a really good series. And then the Angels at the White Sox. And then on Sunday, I'm really going to get split screen going because I like not on this, you have 3 pitchers going Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I have 3 pitchers going Sunday.
Nice.
Sandy will be pitching against you.
Against Gilbert, that's going to be awesome.
So yeah, so that'll be Marlins, Mariners, Sandy versus Gilbert. That's going to be much watch. And then Buehler goes against the Tigers in LA, and then Musgrove goes back to where it all started in Pittsburgh. So I won't be able to watch that because I'm blacked out from Pittsburgh, but I'm definitely going to follow his start. So yeah, just super excited to have some pitchers I really love to watch live on Sunday and taking a lot of these serious. I'm really looking forward to some downtime after what's been a busy stretch here.
I probably shouldn't say this and broadcast it, but are you aware of some of the services like Unlocator?
Yeah, you've mentioned it to me a couple different times, and I need to put some headspace into trying to figure that out.
So for me, it allows me to watch Mariners games live, and I think it's $9 a month, and I just utilize it during the baseball season, but it was well worth it for me to be able to watch Mariners games.
Yeah, because I'm blacked out from Orioles, Pirates, 2 others, Phillies,
yeah.
1 more, Washington.
That sucks. That's
So
rough.
I can't watch any of those games.
Yeah.
And not just home games, like any of them.
Right.
So and like the Pirates is like, I want to be able to watch Cabrian. I want to be able to watch Roansy when he comes up.
Right.
And I can't.
Right. So I've got time for the open forum if we want to do it in about 5 minutes. My question for you is, which team do you hate the most, and why is it the Yankees?
That's good. I can reel off teams that I don't like. I don't know who do I hate the most?
Like, what's the history behind hating that team?
Why don't you go why I think, so we don't have dead air?
So I hate the Yankees. They had more financial might than anyone else for a long time. Their fans are incredibly arrogant, at least the ones that I've interacted with. I've got an aunt and cousin and uncle and cousins in New York who are, I wouldn't even call them like baseball fans, but they're still obnoxious about the Yankees. I always hated Derek Jeter. I always thought Derek Jeter was incredibly overrated, especially his defense in the second half of his career. I hated when players went, like Clemens is a Red Sox. He's not a Yankee, right? I don't like Clemens, but he's a Red Sox. Wade Boggs is a Red Sox, not a Yankee, right? And then the 95 series against the Yankees, the Mariners, like, small playoff history has involved the Yankees more often than not. And so to me, they've always been the enemy. I think about, Randy Johnson against Joe Girardi in the playoffs. And I just, the only couple of positives when I think about the Yankees are Dave Winfield. And then when they had John Wetland and Mariano Rivera on the back end of their bullpen, but even Rivera became a pitcher that I couldn't stand. So they're repulsive to me, and that's a strong word, but I don't like anything about the New York Yankees. I don't like the Astros or the Angels either, but the hatred is not quite at that level because, quite frankly, the Mariners haven't played in a lot of important games, and the important games that I do recall are against the Yankees. Quick anecdote. I was a freshman at the University of Michigan in 1995, which is when the Mariners played the Yankees in the playoffs for the first time. And literally, so I lived on a freshman hallway. I think we had 56 guys in the hall, and not a joke, I'd say at least 20 of them were from New York and were Yankees fans. And probably 10 more were from New York and Mets fans. And I got written up by my RA for celebrating when the Mariners won, because I literally ran from door to door screaming at everybody. And I was 100% the only, might have been one of a handful of kids from the state of Washington in that dorm.
Right.
But if I didn't hate the Yankees before I moved into that dorm, I was an incredible Yankee hater after freshman year. But I'll never forget running door to door in my hallway, screaming at whoever wanted to listen that the Mariners beat the Yankees. It was super fun.
I can't match that level of like real life baseball. I have two things I would say. One is I really used to not like the Cubs. Being in the Midwest, like I had this perception of Cubs fans that it was like all about going to the park and drinking beer and go Cubbies and kind of lovable losers. But then basically what happened is I met people, you being one of them. And then I have my friend Kate, who I met in Chicago, who adores the Cubs. Mm-hmm. And like when you have like, she's the only friend I have who like also keeps score. Like when we go to games, I went to a couple of games with her when I was in Chicago doing stuff for Starbucks, and we would go to Wrigley and like we both keep score. And like I just adore her, and she's such a nice person. And so I couldn't hate the Cubs anymore. And then I met you and you like the Cubs. I'm like, okay, so I've softened on them and they've won and they kind of changed that narrative. But growing up, like the Go Cubbies, like it just annoyed me. And I didn't want to see them do well as a result. But yeah, my perception has just really changed because of the people I've met in my life who care about that team.
Yeah.
And my other team I really don't like, and this is really more fantasy related and just organizational related, is the Rockies. I just despise, like, we have to, like, they're just incompetent, and the decisions they make and then the way they construct their team. Like, I haven't even considered a Rocky on my team for 3 years. Right. I considered Connor Joe this year in the draft near the end, and I would say I made the wrong choice to not go after him. But I honestly, it came down to, I don't trust him. I don't trust him to play him. They were platooning him in spring. I just don't want any part of that team because I don't trust him to do anything right. And I have not rostered Rocky for I can't even remember how long. And it's very intentional on my part. And then this whole thing with, if you have a pitcher, when do you play them? Do you play them at home, not away? But you can't play them all the time. And then all their hitters, like, they get deflated batting average and they're really not that good. And there's this whole dichotomy, and like, I'm just sick of the whole narrative. And I'm biased against them. I don't want their players. I just don't want them.
The ownership too.
Yeah. So that's my answer for that one.
I'm right there with the Rockies. I'm right there with you. Cubs. My grandfather is from Gary, Indiana.
Yeah.
He's a Cubs fan, and I remember hearing, like, Cubbies was one of the first words I remember hearing from him. So,
yeah.
So there's some arrogance with the Cubs fans now too, which is a 180 from where they were before. But yeah, I'm with you with the Rockies. I love me some Chris Bryant, and I can't do the Rockies.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, thanks for getting up and talking baseball with me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
All right.
We'll check in on Saturday.
Very well.
Love it.
Thank you.
Have a good day, brother.
Peace.